interestingly, if you look at her hands and bangles, now you have it looks a golden hue as much as that's what she's producing. She's doing. And many people actually felt that these are gold and thought about the people are really, really they are rich. In fact, I remember this seventh famine, Bengal famine in Odisha, and we talk about, I studied that when the commission was set up to look at the poverty of Odisha people, and they come and they show that Odisha people are wearing anklets, which are actually brass, and they thought they are gold. And say these women, rural Indian women, peasant women are wearing anklets which actually probably must more than 100 grams or 150 grams of gold. Then they are not poor, but actually they were brass, and that's a tradition. So therefore, unless until you know the reality, it will be, you will only see outside. And for outside vision is actually very dangerous, because that doesn't give a real representation to what they're having. So that's what the pictures suggest. And interestingly, I have also suggested the pictures find somebody might ask question. I know most people do not ask question. And why most of the cases you find there are predominance of women? Because that's also another reason. Because if you contrast the women status of women in our society, vis-a-vis status of women tribal society, you will come across that despite the poverty, despite the difficulties, status of women is much, much higher than that is in our own society. Right? That's what I think is the predominance of women society, a woman in the role in terms of including choosing their partners. So these are certain things we also take the lessons from their society to our society. Now, next. So if you look at the next slide, again, another woman talk about this type what condition they're looking at. These you don't find, or people going to the well, people going to this, you wouldn't find in urban areas, you don't find in the developed rural areas, farmlands and this. Because one definition of tribe, you look at the geographical location. So when you define tribes, people define the tribals reside in a definitive geographical locations who are very, very difficult to access. Largely forest tracts, forest lands and hilly tracts, which is unassuming for us or impossible for many of us to survive, but they live there. And that is why the great Santal revolution took place when the government of the then British government wanted to tax them, because they were thinking, look, these are the lands you are staying, then where will you get the tax and for whom? In fact, in an interesting debate, I was talking to somebody else in a tribal community in Odisha. So they say that do you have a patta, what is called land rights, title road? He said, who will give the patta? The girl said, no, patta will give to the government. He said, where is the government? Who is the government? No, we are the children of God, and the land, this world, the dharti is our mata, the earth is our mother. So this is her land. So who is Sarkar? हम सरकार के हम भगवान के बेटे हैं, जमीन हमारी धरती हमारी माता है, तो ये सरकार कहाँ से आई? So they are the question like this, because they don't understand what is the idea of that. Because that is why if you look at the Indian condition, even historically, there was no question of the taxation. It is only once this kingship taken place and there is added there must be some fund for the king, then they started taxing. And most of the taxations were never given to the tribal people or hinterlands, and not even or the only exception was that when the people of the medicine men went to collect herbs, a minor tax, forest produce tax was given to them, because they were considered the sacred groups. So these are certain the idea of taxations, and then you look at this thing. This it, and then for example, some human Podu cultivations used to be in some parts of tribal India. We call it as wrong and other things. But then said, look, these are the land which are not used, and we have used them, and why should we pay a tax for that? But this is actually reality, the picture that where they are staying with animals, insects, birds, and all, which are uninhabitable for many of us. And that is actually the real picture to suggest about the barefooted woman with the bare conditions, living conditions, where living condition is extremely, extremely difficult. And then we talk about the development patterns. Next. So these are certain realizing, and that's what I have already discussed that, but still I will, for your benefit, carry out. I wanted to give a definition of that, though I do not understand many of the definitions per se, because many people give it different definitions. and some definitions of contrasting characteristics. But nonetheless, for an analytical point of view, from academic point of view, from a heuristic perspective, it is imperative that we must have a handy definition as a tool to refer to the group which I talk about. And therefore, is a tribe is social group. And obviously, for sociologists, it studies sociology, the study of social groups, right? And therefore, whether primary, secondary, as Quilly says, but in respect of that, we need to sociology as a social groups. And this social group is talk about a territorial affiliation. They are belong to a particular territory, endogamous in nature. That's what Srinivas talks also in terms of caste, that they are marrying within the group. And then what is interesting, no specialization of function ruled by tribal officers. Now, no specialization of function. This is certain thing to talk about. If we read Durkheim, when he talks about the distinction, the transformation of society from primitive solidarity to mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity, he talks about these societies distinguished from each other, from mechanical to organic, because there is a functional specialization. Now, of course, you find in tribal societies, there is no such specialization, right? And who are those things are talking about specializations now? This talk about specialization in terms of like a tribal man, and what in fact you will find in writings of Marx when talk about primitive communism. Now, of course, they are different theoretical perspectives. I'm trying to bring them together, essence of them, and I don't know how successful I would be, but I thank about. But Marx talks about the consciousness. Remember, Durkheim takes the human beings tend to distinguish themselves from other forms of animals as soon as they develop collective conscience. Right. Marx says the human being, the primitive community to distinguish from other forms of human beings, or human beings distinguish themselves from other forms of animals as long as they develop the social consciousness in them. So in that sense, when you talk about a primitive society or primitive tribal communities, they talk about there is no specialized function. And in Durkheim's sense, it will stay. In Marxian sense, no, everybody try to enjoy themselves. Active, conscious, social being, as Marx said. What they are doing then? They were like at morning at morning he is an agriculturist. In the afternoon he's a fisherman because he decides to catch some fish. He's a fisherman. And in the afternoon when sitting he is weaving a cloth. And in the late evening he is singing a song or dancing. So he is a musician, he's a dancer, he is a fisherman, and he believes he rides the boat, is a boatman, he's an agriculturalist. So there is no specialization of work. He's a weaver. And if he sharpens his tools, he is a blacksmith. So in a sense, you find there is absolutely no classical function, no specialization of functions. And mostly interestingly, as all society, that is why I talk about law being support, most societies are of course ruled by certain. So there is a rule, and these are ruled by tribal officers. Now, the interestingly, I talk about, is a law, it's talk about, no society can exist without an existential social order. And however that order is that, and in this case, they're ruled by tribal officers. Now, if you read ancient Indian history, the question of Sabha, Samiti, all these Janpadas, Nagarpadas, and you find they are also talking about the rule. You have more democratic otherwise, but they were ruled by certain things. Their existential concern is that a society is changed. That is why they said anthropologists often define state as a politically organized society, community. So for us, these are politically organized community.